Appearing on Earth over 400 million years ago, plants were one of our planet's first life forms. They provide the organic matter that other living things need to survive. They are present in almost every environment, sometimes in extreme conditions, thanks to impressive adaptations. They have evolved to take on increasingly original shapes, colors, and sizes, employing unusual techniques to survive or defend themselves. However, I've realized that we consider them more in terms of their usefulness, their aesthetic qualities, or as part of a landscape. I want to understand this planet kingdom that is so close yet so unknown. Following recent discoveries, many debates have been kicking off in the scientific community. Are plants able to communicate? Do they have a form of consciousness? Or even intelligence? I have decided to conduct my own investigation into the incredible abilities of the plant kingdom. Incredible plants. Motionless at first glance, I have always wondered if plants are as passive as they appear, and if they can interact with other species in some way. I'm beginning my investigation by meeting with Francis Martin.
It's easy to get a camera and then record to see how it moves from one week to the next. For example, we have a lot of small mushroom corals that are eating away at that tree.
It's a decomposer.
It's a decomposer. Decomposers always stay attached to their food like this. This is quite typical. It's been here for a while. It would need 10, 15, 20 years to eat all of this. But there would be others with it. When a tree is on the ground, like this one, it gets attacked by a series of decomposer mushrooms, which break down wood. They're grave diggers. Little by little, one after the other, or in waves, dozens of species come and break down the wood in different stages of decomposition. So over 15, 20, or 30 years, hundreds of species of decomposer mushrooms will keep coming until all that remains is a powder of the minerals that make up the tree. These minerals then feed the plant litter and humus and make the soil fertile. If I dig up a small oak tree, we can see that all the little roots are connected, communicating and interacting with the symbiotic fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi form symbiotic associations between the roots and the fungus. The fungus sends all these networks of mycelial filaments into the soil, as we can see here, for example. You have to picture it. I can easily picture all these networks in the soil. They suck up nutrients and bring them to the mycorrhizae, the roots interacting with the fungus. A great deal of these nutrients absorbed from the soil, like nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, and micronutrients, are given to the tree. I say given, but it's more like an exchange. Almost a third or a quarter of sugars made by the leaves are given to the fungi, both at the level of the mycorrhizal root, the symbiotic root, and especially to build the mycelial network which explores the soil. This centenarian oak tree behind me wouldn't be able to survive or grow if it weren't connected to the symbiotic fungi. They played a fundamental role in colonization of land masses and continents over 400 million years ago. When plants moved ashore and started colonizing the continents, these were the fungi that helped the plants survive in that era's extreme conditions of drought, sun, and UV rays. There was no soil, so these fungi helped plants to colonize the continents. They have a role to play. This symbiosis is a really important role. That's why I've been working on symbiosis for over 40 years.
Since the tree is static, it risks running out of resources because it gets them all from the same place. The solution is to look for them further away through this symbiosis. Could plants have more complex relationships with other living things? For over 25 years, Ian Baldwin and his team have been studying the defense strategies of wild tobacco in the Americas. I'm astounded by these researchers' discoveries, which demonstrate the sophistication of the plant world.
So we were particularly interested in plant-insect interactions, how plants keep from being eaten. When you're at the bottom of the food chain, like all plants are, everybody wants to eat you. And this particular plant here has evolved a super good chemical defense. It's called nicotine. But there is a caterpillar out there called Manduca sexta, which has the world's record for nicotine tolerance. It can ingest about 100 times more nicotine than a very well-adapted Gaulois cigarette smoker. And what we wanted to do was to study how this plant deals with that caterpillar that has broken through this incredibly useful chemical defense. The Manduca moth, after it nectars on the flower, it lays an egg. The caterpillar, in order to chew a leaf, has to have special saliva. Actually is the recognition molecule that the plant uses to say, aha, I am being eaten by Manduca sexta. So that means I have to do something special because I'm being eaten by someone who does not care about nicotine. So the plant produces lots of different types of chemistry. They actually slow the caterpillar growth down. But at the same time, the plant also produces a bunch of volatile signals. It's like a Chanel No. 5. They puff out these different chemicals that attract predators. And one of the predators that you filmed is Geocorus pallens.
The Geocorus bug has a rostrum that lets it sting its victim. It attacks the caterpillar before devouring it from the inside by inserting its tongue.
Now, if the caterpillar doesn't get killed by those predators, and grows to a bigger bratwurst-sized caterpillar, those bigger caterpillars are invulnerable to the small predators. But the plant then has other strategies to attract bigger predators like lizards. And it does that by producing compounds that are called acyl sugars, that when the caterpillar eats those compounds, now caterpillar poop, when it's eating a leaf, falls to the ground. And very quickly, they sort of give a signal to lizards that are walking around on the ground, knowing, there's a pooping caterpillar up here. And they come and they climb up to the plant and eat the caterpillar.
But this plant's incredible abilities don't end there. If it is too badly affected by caterpillars, it can change its flowering cycle from the night to the day within a week. This way, it attracts a new pollinator, the hummingbird. So why doesn't it always opt for daytime pollination by hummingbirds? Ian explains that moths travel further than these birds, which stay close to their nests. This way, the plant gets more genetic diversity for future generations.
Now, is that manipulation or not? That's, in my mind, that would be very strong evidence of manipulation. And there's plenty of evidence that plants are not only using their chemistry to defend themselves, but also to change the chemistry of the things that are eating them. Change their reproductive cycles, change their hormonal status, maybe even silence genes in them. So, if you're the cook of the world, you can control all the consumers.
Far from being passive, plants have developed an entire arsenal of sophisticated techniques to feed, reproduce, and defend themselves. However, for a long time in our collective subconscious, we have viewed them as simple and inferior beings. Our language is a perfect reflection of this. Vegetative state, shrinking violet, wallflower. So where does this concept come from, which is still deeply rooted in our culture and puts plants at the very bottom of the pecking order?
Our historical relationship with the plant world, at least in the West, has been conditioned by something called the Great Chain of Being. This is the idea that all life is part of a hierarchy. Humans would be at the top of creation, as they used to say. Then there would be animals, and then plants, and still below there would be minerals, things that are completely inert. This notion partly stems from ancient philosophy, which perceives plants as inferior beings because they were considered to have no senses. They were also thought to have no cognition and a really rudimentary kind of soul, if any soul at all. Once again, there are historical and very practical reasons for this. I mean, plants and animals are basically what we eat. Our relationship with them is mainly utilitarian. It's inevitable, since we need to eat and to exploit the world around us, to some extent anyway, in order to produce materials, clothes, and anything we want. That isn't the problem. The problem is that we have placed too much importance on this dimension. Just because you eat certain species, whether animals or plants, and exploit them in one way or another, doesn't mean you shouldn't have some kind of social or ethical relationship with them. In other words, you should take into account the relationships you have with these kinds of beings.
Passive, unfeeling, soulless, and mindless. This perception has endured since ancient times. It wasn't until the 19th century that science took an interest in the plant world. In 1880, Charles Darwin published The Power of Movement in Plants, finally paving the way for new research.
Plants, particularly trees, are able to perceive everything going on in their environment. The temperature, heat, cold, drought, excess water, ion sources in the soil, around their roots, Light. One example is how they perceive light. They have a sense that's similar to vision, in quotation marks, because they don't have eyes or brains to make an image, but two trees side by side can sense each other through infrared light reflected by their leaves. How do they respond? They have an avoidance response, a growth response, known as crown shyness. For trees, this involves growing upwards as fast as possible to get more light and overtake their neighbors. They spend their lives analyzing their environments and responding appropriately.
It's often thought that plants aren't sensitive because they don't have immediately identifiable sensory organs, like our eyes, for example. In fact, plants are very sensitive. They have sensors and receivers all over. Our only similar sense is touch. I can feel touch anywhere on my body. You have to imagine, when it comes to plants, that every sense is like that. The information they receive is very widely distributed compared to us, and that's a big difference. For example, when a plant is hit by a gust of wind, which is a big threat to plants, it feels its whole body being pulled out of shape. It brings this together, even if it doesn't have a brain, into something that tells it what it felt.
Bruno Muglia and his team have discovered that trees have very quick reactions. In 1 second, the stimulus is picked up by the part of the plant that is being removed. Although, strictly speaking, it doesn't have a nervous system or a brain, an electrical signal travels to inform the rest of the plant. However, the intensity of this signal decreases with distance until it stops after about 20 centimeters. So how does the information spread to the rest of the plant? In the course of their research, the team detected another signal, a hydraulic signal, which passes through the plant's circulatory system. This faster hydraulic signal can cover large distances inside the plant. The combination of these two signals creates a hydroelectric signal, which informs the whole plant about a change in its environment, or even a possible danger. As a result, the plant can react.
We're in a fir tree plantation. You can see very straight trunks, quite a few fallen trunks. And there on the edge, here's one. Here's a nice curve. Yes, look. You can see the beautiful curve at the base and then the way it curves above. Then when you look up, you can see how the trunk becomes perfectly straight again, like the letter I. It has made a good recovery. So how does it do it? Because we can't see any muscles. We have muscles to stand up and correct our posture. We also have muscles controlled by nerves, by a nervous system and a brain. A tree doesn't have any of that. So how does this happen? To find out, you would have to cut it down. That would be a shame, so we're going to leave it where it is and look at one of its cousins where something similar happened and which has been cut down. So what happened to it? We can figure it out by going back in time. The final ring is this one from the year the tree was cut down. It was cut down in 2016, so we can go back in time. Here I have 2016, 2015, 2014, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. This first distorted circle is from the year 2000. The previous ring, the last normal one, is from the year 1999. If you recall, in France, there were 2 terrible storms over the Christmas period, which destroyed many forests and tried to kill this young fir tree. It was tilted by the storm, but it wasn't uprooted. It stayed alive like this one. and it set about straightening itself out. How? With these expanded and slightly unusual rings. In conifers, wood tends to expand as it matures, ages, and advances from year to year. It expands lengthways in the direction of the trunk. By expanding, it acts like a jack and pushes the tilted trunk, which is leaning this way. It pushes and bends it to make it stand up straight. This is clear proof that trees are sensitive beings. What does sensitive mean? This is the term sensitive in the biological sense. It means it can perceive information and respond to it appropriately.
We often think that plants orientate themselves and grow in relation to light, because we know light is important for plants. We've all experienced having a poor potted plant at home, which is desperately trying to absorb some light. Everyone's seen that. However, it's not enough to perceive light. To understand the different senses involved in controlling plants' growth and their movement during growth, we have to separate each one step by step. The first step is to remove the effect of the orientation of the light. You can't remove the light if you want a long response, like a tree. So we came up with the idea of giving it light, but light that wouldn't tell it which way was up or down. There would be no sky, and this sphere would make it possible to have the same light everywhere. When we put a plant in a sphere like this, we saw it growing upwards. It was orientating itself based on something, and that something was gravity. It can sense where it is and react accordingly to return to a straighter, more upright position. To find out how it's able to measure the incline based on gravity, you have to go inside the plant and zoom in with a microscope until you can see the cells. We noticed that in these particular cells, there are small grains. These are starch grains. As it turns, this is what happens. There's an avalanche of these grains in the cell. This avalanche lets the plant know which way is down. But even more to the point, thanks to this, the plant can sense and calculate, in a way, its gradient to the nearest degree. This is a major advantage for plants. We only have 2 gravity sensors, one in each ear, and that's all. Plants have miniature versions. They have tiny sensors, which they can put all over their bodies. Their sense is much more precise and much more widespread. They know where they stand at all times. Once we found out how plants sense their gradient through gravity, we tried to stop them sensing it. With the log suspended, the plant's ability to sense its gradient is also suspended. The question is, what will it do? Plants, like humans, have this sense, this 6th sense called proprioception, the awareness of the body. When we learn that plants sense their bodies, it raises the question, but are they aware of it? Are plants conscious? The answer is not necessarily. For example, while I'm talking, I'm constantly feeling the position of my body, the shape of my body, and adjusting it to sit correctly in front of you. However, I'm not conscious of this. I can make myself conscious of it. I can say, oh, I'm doing this right now. But most of the time, I do it unconsciously. And yet I'm doing it. So there's something other than sensing ourselves and being conscious of sensing ourselves. Plants sense themselves. We don't have evidence that they're conscious. That doesn't mean that they aren't, but we don't know. With animals, for example, experiments have been carried out with mirrors to see if an animal recognizes itself in the mirror, in order to see if it has a form of human consciousness, of its body anyway. You wonder whether plants have minimal forms of self-recognition like that. In fact, they do. Because the plant knows where its body is in space and incorporates this into the way it grows. It's a kind of body awareness, if you want to speak about awareness. There is also a recognition of the self in relation to the non-self. So, can we call that consciousness or not? Like I said, it all depends on what we consider consciousness. Oh, sensitive plants. That's the famous Mimosa pudica. They're exposed, which means everyone touches them, and so they have learned not to close their leaflets anymore when touched. Look, but if you pinch them, for example, they still close. This is interesting evidence of learning through habituation. The plant with the clearest signs of sensitivity is called the sensitive plant, or Mimosa pudica. It can be found at the garden centers. It's a small mimosa that withdraws quickly when touched. It curls up into itself. We've known about this for a long time, but it was considered somewhat of a curiosity. This was a plant that was a bit like an animal. We had no idea that, in fact, all plants are. The reason is because the sensitive plant has a very quick response, but trees respond slowly. They have a growth response, which we don't see. Actually, it happens very quickly. It happens right away. But since we don't see them grow, we don't realize they've changed. The fact that our visual system doesn't allow us to see what plants are doing all the time prevents us from understanding and realizing that they are constantly responding to what they feel. The aim of this experiment is to demonstrate that trees sense movement in the wind and the way it warps them and respond with growth, particularly growth in diameter, which is linked to wood production. Here's a sensor that lets us know the tree's movements. Here, with this small probe, is a diameter variation sensor. The windier it is, the more wood it makes, sometimes double or triple the amount of wood compared to if there were no wind. We can compare what happens over time. We can see that, at first, it has a strong response to a gust of wind, and then it gradually gets used to it. It will compare it with what it has already experienced. We found out this comparison could take at least a week, sometimes even several months. It has a kind of memory that lets it do this.
With all these revelations, I can't help but ask the question that is currently the subject of much debate. Could plants have a form of intelligence?
A tree's biology is so sophisticated that it does raise the question, are trees, or more generally plants, intelligent? I usually respond by saying yes, plants are intelligent. But we have to define what intelligence is. If intelligence is the ability to adapt and respond to one's environment, the answer is quite clear. Plants are intelligent, but bacteria are intelligent too, and slugs are also intelligent. Most living things on our planet are intelligent, in the sense that they are organisms which are perfectly adapted to their ecosystem. But this has nothing to do with the cognitive intelligence that humans possess, meaning the ability to think.
With humans, language is very important to come up with ideas and to think. The ways in which we describe the world, concepts and so on, happen through mental representation. All this is obviously biologically linked to the brain. So clearly, the classic theory of cognition is difficult to apply to the plant world. But on the other hand, we have to account for these memory and learning abilities in some other way.
It's a difficult question because intelligence isn't the same for all living things. In other words, a plant can't respond to human problems. If we give it an IQ test, it will be rubbish. It doesn't know anything, so it will be rubbish. Plants respond to plant problems. That's what it means to be intelligent, to be able to respond to the problems they face.
We can't say an organism is showing intelligence based on just any situation. It must be a very specific situation where the organism has to make choices, for example. In other words, there must be alternatives. It isn't necessarily a conscious choice, but it's a form of information processing that requires decision-making and guides behavior and actions in one direction instead of another. It's a form of choice. Why do I say choice? Because it can't be reduced to chance. It depends on the circumstances and the plant's interests.
Forests and trees are beautiful enough on their own, but they are organisms that are very different from us and function in very different ways. They don't have brains, even in their roots. They don't have nervous systems, but they have found ways to live on this planet that are different from mammals and us human beings. They're different. We shouldn't try to attribute human characteristics to trees.
Taking an interest in plants, trying to understand them better, opening our minds to discover these surprising beings' other abilities, and thinking about new ways of living side by side. This process of raising awareness is happening not only in the scientific community, but also in a variety of other fields, from the arts to agriculture. Jean Toby is at a cerebral crossroads on the fringes of science. He describes himself as a music gardener, since he combines his activities as a nursery gardener with those aimed at revealing the inner music of plants.
When we want to listen to a plant, we pick up its surface electrical activity and transcode this curve into sound. For example, here's the plant's live electrical activity. We can see a very large range. It goes from 46 Hertz to almost 19,000. This shows a plant that's very, very healthy. We don't understand everything, but if I edit the transcoded sound, we get this. We decide on what sounds to put on the electrical activity. Plants don't play the piano or the saxophone. We decide on the sound. This is where it gets interesting. In theory, you could put any type of sound on any type of electrical activity. That's the idea. Except that with plants, the plant can hear itself. So if you put a sound that it doesn't like, or doesn't want, or whatever, this can reduce its electrical activity, or even stop it. We also have a second project focused on cultivation in general, on farmers, horticulture, and people who need to work with plants. This plant music will actually improve the conditions of the crop. When a crop is very weak, we bring in a plant, connect it, and give it a sound, as we're doing here now. The plant in the crop that was weak ends up with better activity than when we arrived. If we stay for 1, 2, or 3 hours, activity increases just by hearing the other plant. For us, that's a fact.
I'd already heard about the purported effects of music on plant growth. Recent scientific studies have shown that plants are able to sense sounds. But beyond this discovery, it would seem that they aren't particularly sensitive to music created by humans. Jean Tobie came up with the idea of musically encoding plants' electrical activities as you would with a synthesizer. He then played this electronic music to other plants in a crop to see if the music would have an impact on them. For example, he connects a fern and places it among plants carrying weak electrical signals. He then plays electrical music to the crop based on the fern's electrical activity. According to him, the other plants appear to increase their own electrical activity within a few hours.
What we need to understand with nature, which isn't necessarily understood when growing on a large scale, is that nothing is a parasite. In fact, parasites don't exist. When we say, for example, that aphids or mildew are a problem, it isn't the mildew or aphids that are the problem, it's the imbalance. I'm not crazy. I know that when there's a lot of mildew on a vine, you have a big problem. But it isn't the mildew that's the problem, it's the environmental imbalance. The same goes for aphids, etc. On the other hand, when everything is balanced, there's very little mildew, really very little, and very few aphids or cochineals on the grass. The plants are very healthy. The plant will manage its own balance. There's the example of a market gardener near Dax who was growing his vegetables in greenhouses that were completely enclosed and insect-proof, with netting to keep insects out. He initially used this first method as a matter of protocol. In the second year, he saw it was working, so he did it across the whole business. 3 years later, what did he do? He removed all the nets. He removed everything. Better still, he even planted wildflowers around the greenhouses to attract more and more insects. It's interesting. The more insects there are, the more life there is, the more beautiful, healthy, and safe the vegetables are. What do you know?
Jean Tobie's experiments have not yet been tested or approved by the scientific community. Sometimes new discoveries lead to controversy, but I believe it's important to study the interactions between species so that we can maintain a balance that will rise to the challenges of tomorrow.
One concept that fascinates me when I'm sitting in the middle of the forest is the idea of the world tree. Let's take an oak tree, an old tree that's several hundred years old. In fact, there are nearly 2,000 kinds of organisms living on this tree and being supported by it. We have even counted more than 350 species that are totally dependent on the tree. If the oak tree disappears, these 350 species can't go and live on another tree. Foresters are concerned that, with climate change, many tree species in our forests today, in the north of France, for example, will suffer, waste away, and disappear. All the universes they support will collapse and disappear. It's worrying. We absolutely need to understand these relationships between living things if we are to have any hope of mitigating climate change's enormous impact.
Alors, voyons, let me see the famous experiments, your big experiments.
So this is the box system.
So là, on voit bien les
You can see the roots
racines,
and the fungi.
le champignon. Peut-être des mycorhizes. Maybe you have already some mycorrhizae there. No, too early. At least we can see short roots here.
Yes.
Huayong is currently testing if the fungus could help the plant to survive droughts, which are becoming more frequent and more numerous. There were droughts in 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22. Maybe in 2023 there will be more periods without rain. Trees suffer a lot when there are droughts. Today, probably 10 to 15% of trees in French forests are wasting away. With his thesis, Huayong is working to verify, or to test rather, if some symbiotic fungi, like this black mushroom, are able to establish themselves in the root system and help the plant absorb more water during droughts, to mitigate the impact of droughts. Can a mycorrhizal fungus be identified and then harnessed to settle on the root system and help the plant grow in drought conditions?
I'm learning that the natural world is full of possibilities we won't know about until we take a closer look at the full diversity of species and their abilities. With the disappearance of these species, whether animals or plants, we're losing the treasures they hold. They could offer potentially beneficial solutions for humanity's future. I have come to meet Camille, who spent the day collecting wildflower seeds from a natural meadow.
My work is about restoring natural environments that have been damaged in various ways, by roads, for example, or in agricultural environments like this one today, where either fallow land or cultivation have damaged the natural environment. In ecological restoration, we consider what existed before. In other words, the ecosystem that existed before and all its functions. But, and this is in the definition of ecological restoration, we must also consider its sustainability and adaptability.
The plots and environments have been segmented. Restoring plant diversity also means reconnecting the site with its neighboring environments. This will allow animal species to roam once again, bringing back a high level of biodiversity. But to achieve this, it's not a question of sowing just any seed. Local wild plant species are more resistant to this area's particular conditions and threats, thanks to millions of years of evolutionary adaptation.
With the French Biodiversity Agency, the National Botanical Conservatory of the Pyrenees and Midi-Pyrenees has created a local plant label to certify seeds to be harvested. This certification ensures that the harvest is carried out in good conditions, that wild plants aren't affected, and that existing populations are respected to conserve natural habitats too. Since I've been doing this job, I've discovered the power plants have, the intelligence they have in creating such diverse habitats, and in being so diverse themselves, and all the uses they can be put to. We've forgotten that. In this meadow, there are medicinal species which are useful for animals. Just now, the farmer was telling me, it's great because this plant is anti-inflammatory for sheep. but for us too. I think we tend to forget the uses of wild and local plants. In my opinion, we're bound to rediscover these things because we're no longer just looking at the productive or aesthetic side of horticulture. We're also looking at what plants offer and everything around them.
Perhaps it's time to restore the plant kingdom to its rightful place and to reflect on our relationship and responsibilities towards it.
What I would like, what I dream of, is for everyone from birth or early childhood to be taught about trees. How do they grow? How do they live? Not to build armies of scientists, but to create informed citizens who know about the planet world and its importance for life on Earth. Why do I insist on this? Because the vast majority of us live in cities. We've become city dwellers, and we're all affected by the plants in our cities or the countryside, even if they've been reduced to scenery. As scenery, they don't move, they don't bite, they don't scream. We don't see them anymore, so they don't interest us. Perhaps it's also an opportunity to reflect on humanity's place in all this and realize we're just one species among many. We're not at the top or at the bottom. We are in a family tree on the leaves, just like this tree here. It's always good to take an interest in the world around us, to rediscover our place, and stop thinking we exist outside nature.
We can learn to live with nature in a different way. We can learn to live with it in a better way. Not only to respect it more, but also to work with it more closely. We need to forge a new alliance with plants. I think we now have what we need to start thinking about this, both in agriculture and in forestry, in law too. What do we or don't we have the right to do with plants? It isn't simplistic. It's not about saying, we just have to do this. We really need to sit down and think things through together. I think this will lead to more intelligent ideas about how to live with plants. I really hope we get there.
When I embarked on this project, I had no idea that I would discover such ingenuity in the plant world and incredible revelations about a fascinating universe that's so close to us and yet still relatively unknown. I've come across beings with the same fundamentals as us: growing, feeding, and defending oneself. Catherine has even told me that we share 30% of our genes with a carrot or a slug, because all living things are descended from a common ancestor and share 30% of identical genes. It might be unsettling to learn that plants have senses similar to our own. But it's now vital to raise awareness of the plant world for what it is, so we can change the way we see and relate to it. Most of the debates sparked by each new discovery show that we are still far away from appreciating its true value. I think that today, we should review our definitions and stop considering human beings as the benchmark. We need to open our minds and broaden our horizons to the other life forms we are deeply linked to. I hope all these little seeds soon sprout and inspire us to reconnect with the plant and animal world. I hope that together we can find a better way of living in harmony with nature.